because it's just a topic that usually only gets asked one question and then we move on to something else, but we're really going to dig into it today. I'm just going to introduce our panelists so we can get into it. I am April Tucker. I'm a re-recording mixer for broadcast television, and I'm also writing a book about business in the audio industry, and my son is almost 4 years old. We have Erika Earl, who's audio experience engineer, hardware developer. She's worked for Slate. She was the chief tech for the Village Recording Studios. She co-founded Evil Tech and XR Creative. She has a 14-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old son. Leslie Gaston-Bird, who is the author of Women in Audio. She's a freelance re-recording mixer and sound editor. She was a tenured associate professor, has a background in radio, and is on the advisory board for SoundGirls. Leslie has a 10-year-old son and an 8-year-old daughter. Keely Noble has been the lighting designer for Pearl Jam for 20 years. She's toured with Cher, Bette Midler, Temple of the Dog, Soundgarden, Smashing Pumpkins, and others. When she's not on the road, she works on the Jimmy Kimmel Show and wrangles her 3 sons who are 15, 12, and 11. Karen Loria is the operations manager for Pearl Jam, has been with them since 2006. She supports the band on the road and in their headquarters as the band's ticketing program manager, tour photographer, fan club co-manager, and now the operations manager. Karen's boys are 5 and 3. And if you haven't been able to tell already, we all do a lot. Jeanne Montalvo is a multi-Grammy nominated audio engineer and radio producer. She was the recipient of the 2018 EQL residency at Spotify Studios and Electric Lady Studios in New York. She's the creator of Live from Latino USA, a live and mostly unplugged video series. She's currently the treasurer of AES New York, and she is the mom of a 2.5-year-old toddler. Tina Morris is the studio manager at the Village Studios in LA. She used to gig as a heavy metal guitarist and freelance engineer in Boston before moving to LA. She started as the night tech at the Village and at the Village Studios in LA and moved her way up, and her son is 10. And then lastly is our moderator, Karrie Keyes, who's monitor engineer for Pearl Jam and Eddie Vedder, executive director of SoundGirls, and single mom to 2 daughters who are now 24. And they were touring before they were even born. And so I'll turn it over to Karrie.
Hi, everyone. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I think this is super important and does not get talked about a lot, so glad that everyone is here. For people that are joining us either on Facebook Live or in the Zoom, people that registered for this sent in some really great questions. So you can feel free to post a question in the chat. And if it's not on our list, we'll add it. We're going to try to get through all the questions that were submitted. If we don't, maybe I'll have everybody send in their answers at a later date, and we'll put a blog article together about it. So I wanted to start out really with the question of when and how each of you decided that you wanted to be a mom, and how if working in the industry deterred that. Like in my case, it was a surprise pregnancy, so I didn't have a lot of time to plan for it. I was just making a decision on whether I was going to become a mom or not. But it was a very daunting decision since I toured for 10 months out of the year. So anybody want to share thoughts on how you decided and what considerations you made, and if you were deterred? Does anybody want to start? Does nobody want to answer it?
I'll start. I'm sitting here with my mouth full because moms multitask. Audio moms multitask. Before the Zoom, I was thinking, do I want to be eating on camera? Do I want to, And it's like I have put off so many meals with so many Zooms. It's like we gotta be real here. I swore I wasn't gonna have kids when I was in my 20s, and I was pretty sure I wasn't going to have kids when I was in my 30s, and then when I hit about 36, that little voice said, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Who are you, little voice?" And it was that biological clock. I'm like, that's a thing? So I got hit with the clock. I didn't have any plans until really I started to question my purpose on Earth, and then I'm like, yeah, I think I need to do this. So I made a conscious choice, and I had my first child when I was 40 years old.
I'll go. I always wanted a family from when I was young. I knew I wanted a family. The path was a little more complicated, and I remember when I was in my very first work study starting out, there was a woman program director, and I sat in her office and I said, how do you have a relationship in this business? How do you have a family in this business? Because it's just like, I worked all the time. I worked nights, I worked weekends. It was just exhausting. And she told me it was hard, and that was all I got. And now in retrospect, I agree with her, but I do wish I'd gotten a little more out of it, which is why I'm excited about this panel. I think it is hard, but I did make that decision. I didn't meet my partner. I lost a lot of friends in the first year in New York because, again, I worked nights, weekends, several jobs. But I did end up meeting somebody when I was 29, and then we got married, and then now I had my first also at 30. Well, Leslie decided at 36. I had my first at 36, which was actually a kind of a journey as well, because we had some struggles to get pregnant. And now I'm actually pregnant again with number 2, coming soon in December, a quarantine baby. But yeah, it was always a decision of something that I wanted, and it was just kind of navigating how we were going to do that in this industry.
Yeah, so I'll go next. I have always wanted to be a mom. I'm a super proud mama of 2. And I got pregnant when I was 25 unexpectedly. And yeah, it was just a matter of figuring out how to do all of the things that I wanted to do and be the best mom that I could be. And it's like you say, it's like everyone says, there's no preparation for it. It's really hard. It's like, I will never forget holding my newborn baby and thinking, how do people do this with all the work and everything else? It's not easy. And you find a way. Yeah. So that's my story.
I'll go next. I always knew, like Jeanne, I always knew that I wanted to be a mom, and I always knew that I wanted to be in music. And I just kind of figured it would kind of, I don't know, an opportunity would come that I could actually be a mom and still remain in music, and actually, just be getting to have a full-time gig at a studio was very hopeful for me. And then the moment, it was literally like 3 months after I became studio manager, because I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have a 9-to-5 job. Little did I know I'm actually on 24/7 with the studio. But at least, I was able to at least, leave the office around 6 p.m. every night. And that was, just that security really kind of pushed us to say, hey, we should probably have a kid now, and then maybe down the road I'll go back to engineering. But at this point right now, I'm just very thankful that I was able to have a 9-to-5 job that keeps me, it's kind of on schedule, so I can spend time with my son. So I find myself very, very fortunate in that situation.
I'll go next.
Tina, you bring up a really good point, though. I've always had really flexible employers. Like, I've only worked with people that were understanding of and totally cool with me being a mom. Anyways, just wanted to shout that out, because it's part of the interviewing process. It's like, whoever I'm going to be working with, you have to understand that in some ways I have to kind of be the master of my own schedule, because I have these kids and these responsibilities which come first.
It's funny, actually, that's, I was just going to kind of make that point that for me, I always knew I wanted to have kids, and I have my cat here who knows how to open doors, so he's just going to be next to me. So I always knew I wanted to have kids. It was always part of my plan. But when it kind of came around the time where I was like, okay, I think we're ready for this, I was 100% freelance. And it's funny because you think that freelance would be the optimal way to be a parent. But for me, I think I just wanted the stability of because my husband's also freelance. We just wanted the stability of health insurance and things like that. So I kind of took a couple years and pivoted into jobs and clients that I knew would be more flexible, more conducive. It wasn't the, you know, we need you to work in an hour, like being on call, like an ER, like I was doing before. But I had my son when I was 36, and pregnancy just doesn't go as planned. I kind of like Jeannie. It's not like I said, okay, I'm gonna get pregnant in March so that I'm off in December because that's my low time. That's not how it goes. You kind of just have to know that whatever, you can try to plan, and for some people it works and other people it doesn't, and you just kind of got to roll with it. And especially if it's just like a career goal, if it's a priority, you'll figure out a way to make it work. And I also took a lot of financial planning, so saving money and making sure that we would have a comfortable, buffer so that I could take more time off.
I'll go. Like others on this panel, I also had a surprise pregnancy at 33, but I knew I always wanted to have kids. But when it happened, in retrospect, I'm so glad it happened when it happened at 33, because we ended up having 2 more kids. And, I was done being pregnant and having babies by the time I was 37. So, but I don't think, if I would have planned it, I think I would have just put it off because I was kind of at a really high point, or, on a pretty rapid trajectory with my career at that time. I was touring a ton. Every tour I was getting seemed to be bigger than the last one. And these weren't always short running tours like the PJ tours. Some of these tours were going out for a year at a time. And I think there would have always been another tour that would have delayed it 1 more year. And so the fact that it happened when it happened by surprise was kind of kismet. And yeah, so it's when I meet other people, there are so many logistical challenges in this business. Trying to plan for that part, it's unplannable. I mean, you can plan financially to take some time off, but when you start to think about what this means in terms of, especially making the switch from full-time touring to trying to reinvent your career so that you're not gone all the time, and the, all the challenges of childcare that come with our business. If I sat and thought about all that and used that as an excuse, if I was waiting for all that to line up before actually making the decision, it would have never happened. So when I meet people sort of on the, fence about having kids, they know they want to have them, but they're trying to, line up all the parts and pieces. I always am just like, just do it. You're not going to figure it all out ahead of time. It'll work out.
And it'll never look how you think it will. Like, your idea of what childcare is going to be before you have a baby is not at all like what it actually turns out to be.
I'll go next. For me, I was, I was 35 when I got pregnant with my first. At that point, I was already pretty established, and I think I had been touring with the band for at least 5 years at that point. So I had that kind of system already down. And so it wasn't like introducing something new. But what's different here is that I'm working with the band full time. So I'm not freelance. I have a salary with benefits and things like that. So jumping from being a touring person, meeting someone, I think I met my partner when I was 33. So I never really thought of myself as having a family. It wasn't a goal of mine, but when I met the right person and I was already touring and he could totally hang with that, and then it was really him that decided he was ready to have a family. At that point, I was like, okay, I have this system in place, I have benefits, and I have some flexibility here. It's just about the logistics of touring. I can figure that out. So if it happens, it happens. Let's just see what happens. And so very soon after I got pregnant, and then it just, I think a lot of my time just shifted to figuring out logistics of work-family life. And that definitely hasn't ended or gotten easier, but that's really the focus.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's the biggest piece of advice is you can't plan it. You can't plan it like after I graduate from high school, I'm going to college and then I'm going to be a lawyer. You just have to find the right time and go for it. And sometimes the right time just happens. So I think everybody would agree that it takes a huge village to do this. And I don't think that's totally, isolated to this industry, but in general of raising kids. And, I think Karen and Keely and I had to get very creative on childcare and what tours we were going to accept or not accept, and finding other work to fill in those gaps so we could be at home more. I think Karen and Keely and I are very fortunate that I think we all have a love of music and we love working with Pearl Jam. And I think we're very lucky that when we tour, we're not doing an 18-month tour. And we have breaks and we can see our kids. And
Yeah, no, I'm so grateful because actually Tina and I got to work together. I mean, I saw her son up in her office and would like scare him and tickle him, in between, running up and down the stairs at the village. And then she helped me out when I was rewiring Studio F with my son, and I would plop him up in her office. And yeah, it's pretty cool.
But I do have to add to that, like, I had this vision before of like, okay, I'll have my son, he'll be a newborn, and I can just like literally, I was big on baby wearing, like literally just, stick him on me and I can go do 100 other things. And it just didn't work for me. Like some people that really works, it's actually Amy Reynolds, who's in the participants here, who like is amazing. Like she with both her kids, there's pictures of her like, wearing them and working and doing all this stuff. I couldn't do it. So, you just don't know. It depends on the kid too.
Yeah. That is very true. I had one that I could have maybe worked like that, and then the other one that needed constant movement and stimulation, and that was not good. That would never work. So
yeah, I had a sleeper baby and then a hyper baby. It was you can never predict. Yeah, and it does take a village.
Does anybody have extra advice or tips because I think most of us worked pretty much up to the last minute. I was on tour till I was 7.5 months pregnant. Any tips for taking extra precautions, staying healthy, having a healthy pregnancy, and still working crazy hours or with crazy travel schedules?
Don't say yes to European festival tour when you're 6 months pregnant. Don't do it. I toured with all 3 of my pregnancies and I worked up right until the end. And at least with touring, the great thing about touring is you are on your feet all the time. So you're getting exercise without even trying. So that I always sort of felt like that was really healthy. It got harder towards the end, just when you're bigger. I toured at different stages of pregnancies, but I did tour up until 8 months with one, which didn't thrill my doctor, but I promised to come home at 8 months. But just, staying on your feet or keeping active for me on the road, I would get more tired, obviously, but you end up having the support of your community around you. Especially the dads or other people on tour that already have kids are a little bit more sympathetic to your situation, but it was always a blessing to be able to work up till the end for me.
Yeah, I toured in all 3 trimesters between my 2 pregnancies. And I will say the best sleep I got was on the bus with a body pillow. I brought the body pillow with me and it was awesome. It was better than my sleep at home. But, you know, I think a lot of it also depends on, pregnancies are different for different people. I got a little bit of the morning sickness, but that was a European tour bus situation. But for the most part, it was fairly simple. I worked, with my first kid, I worked all the way up to 9.5 months, not on the road, but I was in my office when I went into labor at 9.5 months. Because for me, it was like sitting at home and just feeling gross was actually worse than having an activity to focus on and be distracted from how I was feeling in that 9th trimester. And so that was just going into work and getting shit done until suddenly I thought I had eaten something weird. It didn't even occur to me I was going into labor.
I'm probably the poster child for things not going as planned. I was put on bed rest at 29 weeks. Like I literally was at work Wednesday night, walking up 4 flights of stairs. I was in excellent shape. And then the next morning, they're like, we need to admit you for a couple days in the hospital and you need to stay home. Like, don't get up unless, you know, you need to go pee, which is a challenge. But so the only advice I would give there is it's like, just be prepared for things happening earlier than you think. And my situation was extremely rare. But still, I had no idea. I didn't see that coming and never thought that would be part of my pregnancy experience.
Yeah. Anyone
Yeah,
else?
like for me, yeah, I kind of looking back on it, wish I wasn't like the rah, I'm gonna like put everything into my job and not take care of myself during my pregnancy. I feel like I just kind of let myself just kind of like be a pregnant blob up in my office, and I wasn't really exercising and taking care of myself. I was just working really long hours and just as, you know, business as usual. And I was like, I'm just going to work all the way up until I go into labor. My doctor at 33 weeks on my checkup just said, you're going to have to go home and lay in bed. And it didn't register to me that she was saying like, I'm not going into work anymore. And you know, my husband was like looking at me and I was like, so I can go back tomorrow though, right? Because like I've got a meeting tomorrow. And she's like, no, you're on bed rest. And I'm like, yeah, for today. And then I'm going back tomorrow, right? Because I've got stuff to do and everything. She's like, no, like you are on bed rest. You are not going back into work until after your maternity leave's over. And I couldn't get it through my little skull that I was actually like, I had pregnancy-induced hypertension. So I was like, okay, well, I'll just relax and I'll be fine. And she's like, no, you might have a seizure if you don't go home right now. So it just kind of flipped everything. And it was kind of shocking that, and it was shocking for everybody else because everybody else was like at work was like, wait, you're not coming back in. What are we going to do? Who's going to book? You know, my boss hadn't picked anybody to cover me yet. So I just had to call them and be like, sorry guys, you're on your own. And havoc ensued at the village for a brief moment where my boss was yelling at everybody and telling everybody that they're not allowed to ever get pregnant because this is such a nightmare, which was interesting. But yeah, that's, you know, so yeah, don't plan for everything to go perfect. Plan for things to go early and not to go as planned.
And I think I had my Pro Tools rig at the hospital. So, you know, just saying.
I also was planning to work up until birth. I almost made it. I never left doing music stuff, but I did pivot to radio like 6 years ago. Because, and I admire all you live touring ladies a lot because I used to do a lot of local live sound in the performing arts high schools. And I remember the day that I was like loading in monitors and I was like, I could never do this at 9 months pregnant. And so I made a conscious decision to move into radio. So I was working in radio for my first pregnancy. And I had planned to work until the day, like literally I was like, I want to go into labor at work, because my mat leave was like very counted, and I was refusing to like not have enough time. Like I didn't want to go early because I wanted to make sure that I had enough time on the back end with the baby. And at 39 weeks, I got diagnosed with preeclampsia, and the doctor was like, we're going to induce you. And by the time I got all my tests back, it ended up being like right at the 40-week mark. But I remember going into work after my appointment, and I was told everybody, I was like, all right, people, this is happening. And then everybody was in the scripts, and like the scripts that I was working on that week were the ones that were airing. So like there were like 4 different people getting the script ready, and then we were tracking on the same day because we didn't know if I'd be able to record the next day. And it was just kind of like an insane day. And then that ended up being my last day, which, you know, I ended up being induced a few days later. So I didn't lose too much time on the mat leave, but it was kind of like, it was something that I wasn't really expecting at the time. So ditto on the don't make too many plans. And this pregnancy has been, I don't know. I wasn't expecting, my nausea was bad last time, but this was like a whole nother level of like awfulness. And I was sad to be stuck at home because I don't get to walk around as much. So I put on a lot more weight quicker than I wanted to. But I'm thankful to be at home because the sickness was hard to deal with. So you really never know how they're going to go and what to expect from them and how it's going to affect your work. So it's been, don't make plans.
Anyone else? Leslie?
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, I'm trying to gauge the speed at which each of our moms is speaking, because I read some statistic that moms with 2 or more children are more efficient. And I think that just has to do with, you know, I've got T minus whatever to get what I have to do done before. But just in terms of, pregnancy, yeah, I had bad. You remember that scene in Fargo where the lady, Frances McDormand, is just doing her police work, and then she goes and she pukes, and then she comes back and she finishes her job. Like, I had one of those. I was taking my son to school, to nursery, and then, you know, I was going home while I was pregnant with my daughter, and I just like, oh, I need to pull over for a second and let her on, and then I went on home. But I think, but it just in terms of like the ease of the pregnancy, like I had, you know, regular natural pregnancy, and I think all of the ease of the pregnancy itself was God's way of saying, and I'm not religious, but in this particular case, I gotta go there because it was actually the first 3 years of my kid's life that, Jesus Christ, I mean, you know, it was ridiculously hard, but you know, I just want to say there's a reason why they call moms badass moms, you know, because I got through the first, you know, 3 to 5 years of my kid's childhood like alive. How the hell did I do that? I don't know. Anyway, I'm sure I've taken us off topic. Sorry.
No, but I'm curious, Karrie, because twins touring.
Yeah, right.
I want to hear from you. Come on.
Yeah, it was the last tour I did was with the Chili Peppers, and it was about a 3-week leg on the East Coast. And that was super challenging because I was huge. And then we were on shitty East Coast roads, so the bus would just be bouncing all night. But I was fine, you know, once the gig was normal and the lack of sleep was normal, you know, that was, you know, my doctor, he was like, you're used to doing this, right? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, then don't, he goes, we're not going to change it unless there's a problem. So I kept, the one thing he wanted me to do was to make sure I had my blood pressure monitored every night after the show. And if it reached, I don't remember where the cutoff was, but if it reached a certain point, then I was supposed to call him and stop and come home. obviously I didn't lift anything.
Forklift story, Karrie.
Oh, the forklift story. I can't believe you remember the forklift story. So one of the gigs on that run was at Madison Square Gardens. And we got there in the morning and the stage was set up. There was a wing being built to put monitor position on and backline. But there was no stairs to the stage. And there was no stairs to the wing. And they weren't getting built in the near future. And everybody was using road cases because we just needed to get going. And I'm like, when are stairs coming? I'm talking to our production manager. I'm like, I need stairs so I can get to work. And he's like, yeah. And he goes and talks to the union head and they just look, and it's New York. It's local one. And they just go, well, we can fork her up. And I was just like burst into tears. I was just like, I'm like, that is not happening. Someone needs to build stairs. So, yeah.
New York unions are the worst.
New
That
York
does not
union.
surprise me.
Helping me out. So, yeah. I just thought of a question that people that tour might want to know. Because I toured up till I was 7.5 months. Keely, you toured till like 8 months, right?
Yeah, with one of the pregnancies I did.
Karen might have been in a slightly different situation. If you had to go home, if we had gone into labor during the tour,
Mm-hmm.
who did we have lined up to take our place? Like if we were on tour, we went into labor, like Dan was your tech then. Could he have run the show?
Yeah, but not all the tours were PJ that I was out
Yeah.
with. So no, there was never really, I never had an official backup person. It's just, especially for something like PJ, those tours, they're really almost impossible for someone to step in with little to no preparation. So no, it was a gamble. I rolled the dice at the time, I suppose, and so did the people that were employing me. But I did go into early labor. I always forget this because they managed to stop the labor, but thankfully I was in LA. I was doing a TV show and I went into labor one day and then drove myself across town, in excruciating pain. But I wouldn't know what to say to that because especially, I think all of our jobs, it's, you would have to pay to get someone out there to do training and you may not ever, need to use them. And that's a hard cost to swallow. So I think we all just sort of took chance.
Yeah, I did the same kind, it was like, I'm going to do this last leg. And the band still had more, they had like 2 other legs left in the US. And it was like, and then so-and-so is going to take over. But we never really talked about what if I went into labor early. It would have been, this is hilarious, it would have been Smitty would have had to take over the show.
You were employees, right? Because I think at least in the US, they wouldn't be able to not hire you because you're pregnant, right? Or did those questions ever come up?
I was paid, I was freelance, but I worked directly for Chili Peppers and Pearl Jam at that point, but they were paying me as a freelancer. So yeah, internally, they wouldn't, I don't think Karen would know this better. Would they have to hire me at this point? If I was pregnant? It's like, can you do the tour and can you commit to this?
Yeah.
And then all that other stuff is like, oh, you're going to have a baby in the middle of the tour. We're not hiring that person, right? I mean, I think it might be different for us on Pearl Jam just because all of us have been with the band for so long and it's family centered. But, Keely would have, if you had been out with Cher and said at six months into the tour, I'm going to have a baby.
Yeah, I mean, well, that was the case. I found out I was pregnant on tour and it was a long running tour. So in that case, I did line up someone to take over the position. So there was some advance notice, but the other tours that I did were all short running. I probably would not have taken a really long tour.
Yeah.
Particularly, I wouldn't have taken anything that overlapped with the end of my pregnancy, you know, just knowing the possibility of going into labor. So I think you have to be a little judicious about the work you do take with that in mind. I think there's no one size fits all with that. It's also going to depend on the people you're working with.
Yeah.
And management, and they may not be able to outwardly say they can't hire you because you're pregnant, but they may not want to, you know, to take the risk of having a pregnant lady on the road.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's what Chili Peppers, they had a meeting before we did the last legs, and 2 of the guys wanted me out, and 2 of the guys were not comfortable liability, you know, they were more looking, it wasn't that, oh, she's pregnant, she can't do her job. It was, what happened, what if anything happens? We don't want anything to happen.
I think it's important though, like, because everybody here was established at that point. So like, you already had a relationship with these people, so why wouldn't they hire you? And I think that's something that, like, I've heard some people, because people get paranoid about the biological clock that kind of does exist, but kind of doesn't, because everybody thinks like, oh my gosh, I have to have kids right away. But like, I mean, in New York, it's normal for people to start having kids at 35. Like, I felt young at 36 going to my OB, where there were people like 39, 40, you know, and I'm 39 now having my second. Like, it's normal to have kids later. And I'm very thankful that I did all of the things that I did, and I traveled and I did work studies in Canada, and like, I did all the things, and then now later I'm having kids. So like, I think all of you ladies, have, like, that's the common thread, is that you were established, you are working with these people. And so like, there's no reason not to hire you at that point.
And I think it's a good point too. Like, I know, like I said, I kind of started pivoting the employers I was working for. And part of that was like, I don't know, maybe 5 years before I had my son, my husband fell and broke both of his arms. And I remember calling the studio that morning that I was supposed to be working at. And I said, hey, I am like literally at the emergency room with my husband. And they said, sorry, you need to come into the studio. And that right there was like, for me, that was the moment where I went, okay, this is not the type of company I would want to work for with a child, because of, say, you know, I mean, even not being a parent, you can picture like, okay, you have a kid who's sick, and like, you really need to be home. Like, you really have to be home with them, or you have to take them to the doctor or whatever. Like, that you start feeling out beforehand the types of environments and people that you want to work with, who are either family oriented or who are just accommodating, who are just like decent people, you know?
Yeah.
That's actually how I got my tech chops, honestly, because my path prior to my first child was audio engineering, recording studio, album session work. And after I got pregnant, I knew there was no way I was going to be able to handle those hours and actually do the job that I needed to be doing. And so I got on a bench, started fixing stuff, and it completely changed my whole entire career trajectory, but kept me in the studio. And I still get to record. I still get to work on all different kinds of things. I didn't have to completely give it up, but at that moment, it felt like I was giving it up. And then, you know, I took the time off to figure it out and have my baby and find the right work environment with the right employer. And like Tina mentioned, getting those hours was really key for the early years for me, and to make it work as a single mom. And yeah, and I like huge silver linings. Like, I love all of the work that I've gotten to do. I never expected that I would become a sound technician. I always thought I was going to be some fancy, famous producer. But, you know, here we go. I've gotten to do all of these amazing things and have the kids and work in the industry. And yeah, so it goes back to that, like, you can't always plan for it, and be open to knowing that this is the kind of work that you want to do and you're passionate about, and you will find a way and it will work out.
Yeah, that was kind of leading into my next question of, like, I think everybody probably, we've talked about it, everybody pivoted their career slightly. Maybe, I don't think any of us are doing exactly what we started out doing. You know, for me, and I think it's similar with Keely, at that point in time, I was out on the road for 10 months, and clients and offers that I were getting were bigger and bigger. And when I decided to have the girls, I kind of had to just rethink that. I knew that I wasn't going to be out on the road for 10 months. And the Chili Peppers were starting like an 18-month world tour. I think we had already started it. I think the last leg I did was like the beginning of it. And their solution to it was they wanted to hire a nanny and for me to just be out on the road with them. And I was just like, I can't. No, I'm not raising my kids on the road with a nanny. Like it didn't sound right to me. But I always tell people, I mean, that it's probably one of the main reasons I'm still with Pearl Jam is because of the way they toured. I was able to have that balance, that home and being on the road balance. And who knows, I think about it all the time. Who knows where I'd be if I didn't have the kids? I probably, at that point, Pearl Jam was not touring that much. And I probably would have taken another client and, that would alter my life of where it is now. So I don't have any regrets at this point. But I think that's maybe the same for all of us, of like, at a certain point, there was kind of a loss in our careers and probably a mourning period, and then figuring out what we were going to do. Was there moments like that for everybody?
Absolutely. I had to let it all go. Like, I worked in an archaeology lab for a year, dry brushing bones. Like, it took me a year to figure it out.
Right.
Yeah, I think for
go
sorry.
ahead. Who's that? April.
Oh.
You should go. No, who is
Oh,
it?
it's Tina. Yeah.
Oh, Tina.
Oh,
yeah,
no, I mean, I think at this point, like, for me, I think I still kind of mourn not being in like the engineering seat. To be honest, I don't think I've ever admitted that to anybody after 10 years of not being in it. But, I have a feeling I'll probably do it again once once my little guy is, probably 15 or 16 and really doesn't want to snuggle with mommy anymore. And then maybe I'm like, okay, well, cool. Like, those 16-hour days are probably more welcome now because you don't need me. But
Don't let
I
Tina fool you.
it.
She still records at home. Don't let her fool you. I've heard
every once in a while. And, I did get back in the seat after 10 years. My last big recording session was actually while I was pregnant, and then I had to actually have the assistant EQ for me because my belly was too big and it was knocking all the faders out of whack. And then after that, like I engineered last year for our dear friend Ed Cherney before he passed, and I was like, oh my God, I can still do this. So I haven't written it off. I'm just taking a little break for right now.
Yeah.
So, but I do every once in a while when people are like, do you still engineer? I'm like, well, no, not yet, but I'll get back to it.
I was just gonna say, in my case, that mourning and that letting go, I mean, it's just a little different for me because we decided to move to England, and we were, strategic about when we went because our kids were at the right age, because they would be normally transitioning in school. To leave a tenured professor job, I think nobody told me that they thought I was crazy, but I imagine that people thought I was crazy because, everybody says it's a job for life. But whenever I hear that term for life, I think of prison terms more than, you know what I mean? Like, dude, is that what we really want? Is a job for life? It sounds like it should have some ominous notes with it. And I don't think I want that. Because if I think of being true to myself when I was whatever 18 to 24, when I decided I wanted to be an audio engineer, being a professor was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to be Leslie Ann Jones, you know, at Skywalker or whatever. And so, yeah, so now I'm in England and I'm, you know, looking at getting a PhD and just doing something else, you know. And I'm still defining myself. And the good news is I keep watching these, I keep reading and watching things that reaffirm that, you know, 60 is the new 40 or whatever, 50 is the new 40. So I'm just, you know, really excited about finding what Tempit Nisi means. I don't know how to pronounce Latin, but you know, you watch The Matrix, know thyself, you know. And so that's what I'm working on.
I think it's important to, because in the context of this conversation, that like being a mom doesn't mean that your career is going to be at a deficit, because everybody pivots, everybody sacrifices. You know, I know guys who have, you know, were on a trajectory to be major producers, and they decided to change course because they just didn't like that they weren't making money. And I think if anything, taking a slight detour, even if it's for, you know, these years to take care of a child and bring that into your life, just makes, like Tina said, it refocuses you on the things that really matter. And I was kind of lucky in the sense that I had my, like a quarter year, mid career crisis before I had a kid. And I had an opportunity. It's like one of the biggest opportunities of my career. And I quit 3 days in because I said, there's no way that I'm going to be able to do these hours and have a life. So even like, you know, being married, being like, I want to spend time with my spouse. Well, that's going to affect the type of jobs that you take. Having a child will affect the types of jobs you take temporarily, right? It's not like what you do today is going to be the rest of your life. It's just for this period and this phase of your life. And then you can go back and do whatever you want later, you know? And if anything, I feel like for this group, the things that we have done as pivoting have probably been more drastic or interesting or changing the lives of others than maybe what we would have done if we didn't have kids.
I think for me, my pivot, as I mentioned before, was half because I didn't think I'd be able to handle pregnancy doing the things that I did, but also I was stressed beyond belief because I'm like, with so much work, so many different gigs, like two gigs in a day, morning, night, weekends, and I never saw my spouse, and I just was like, I can't keep up at this pace because I am going to die at 40. Like, so when I really found that I enjoyed radio, I did live radio for a little bit, which was like, gave me the same kind of adrenaline that like a live concert would. And then I started doing podcasting and I was like, wow, sound design is cool. Mixing podcasts is cool. And then I started producing a little bit. But I did find that I missed music. And then I put my resume in the pot for that EQL residency, thinking like they're never going to pick me because I have this background. But they did. And then I got to do music again. And now I'm doing music again. My son was 1 when I got that residency. And that was really hard to adjust to that with a kid, because I didn't remember like what the music industry was like and the things that go on in the studio and what that would be like for me. But it doesn't go away. And I mean, I ended up finding ways to bring music into the radio life because I had started the Live from Latino USA, which was part of the podcast, which was a video so that they could perform. So like you find ways to hybrid the things that you love and that you like to do in one thing. So it never really goes. And I think in the actual post for this seminar was really nice. Like you're going to be a happier mom if you're doing something that you love. So.
Yeah.
I think for me, this is 16 years ago now. I had no precedence. There's no precedence. I had no role models. Karrie, you were the only woman I knew that had successfully had kids and still managed to stay in the touring game. But there were the very small handful of women I knew that had kids that were in touring all left. I didn't know anyone in lighting that had a baby at that point and still stayed in the business, let alone had a kid. And so it was really tough because you didn't know, I didn't know what effect it was going to have on my career, if I would still be able to stay, you know, live music is my first love. I was fortunate that I did some TV before getting heavily into touring, you know, and some corporate shows. So I had a, you know, like just a sprinkling of contacts in that world. But if you don't work in it, kind of the pivot was harder than I expected. Yeah. And yes, it works out, but I think, you know, you have to be prepared if you're making such a huge switch that it's going to take some time. And it probably took me a good couple years to get my foot in the door of television here locally, because especially if you come from the touring world, you have to be, I learned a valuable lesson early on. If you tell people, even if you were still just starting up tours and not staying on them, the minute you tell someone you're working on a tour and you're trying to stay local, they just mentally write you off. They think that you're still in the touring game. You're not going to be accessible. You're not going to be someone that they can depend on. You're not going to slot into that position as maybe someone's regular. I was trying to program television at the time. And you know, it just took having a couple allies, which to this day I really credit with helping me make that pivot, putting my name in other people's ear. But it took a couple years. And I also think it's a little bit misleading to say, at least in my case, that my career wasn't affected. It was, you know, but it was by choice. I made a concerted choice to stay home. I always wanted the scales. I was super fortunate. You know, I did a lot of, you know, one-off live television style shows for the first couple years. But then once I got the talk show, that's kind of the closest thing to a 9-to-5 job in this business. And it's not necessarily the end-all be-all job, but what it gave me was the ability to be a full-time working mom with my evenings free. I can take my kids to school. I can actually make plans ahead of time. I have weekends off. In the baby years, it was a lot easier. I mean, childcare was a nightmare, but it was a lot easier having a haphazard schedule. But the minute you get into school and sports and activities and maintaining a schedule in a sort of freelancer's life, it was very challenging. And so I look at some of my male counterparts and you know, we all started at the same time, and definitely I had to walk away from a lot of opportunities that would have elevated my career, especially in the design world. But I do it without regret. Obviously, for me, you know, my kids always came first. And back to what someone was saying earlier, you know, I sort of see it as 3 chapters, right? You're getting your start and established in the business. And then if you choose and want to have kids, you have these like critical child rearing years. My oldest is 15 and a half, and they are all starting to get older. And just this year, I was really starting to pursue more work outside of town again. I mean, I've always traveled and kept my, you know, fingers in the light. I've been lucky to do that, to work with bands like PJ and others who don't tour for long periods of time. So now I feel like I'm sort of on the eve of maybe another, not a pivot per se, but letting my career take more of a front seat than it has been for the last decade.
Yeah.
Oh, and then COVID hit, so that kind of.
And then COVID.
And that fucked everything up.
And then destroyed us, yeah. All right, I'm gonna move on with, I think I'm looking at the questions because I think we've covered some of this. I think daycare issues are a big question that people have, and we kind of covered it, of like everybody's situation is different. I mean, there's no such thing as daycare for people that tour. They're either with your spouse, and then you got to find someone to help to do your job because you're not there. And Keely had this issue too. Both my kid's father tours, so we had 2 touring schedules to deal with. And you know, I know Rick started working in town, but he was still touring. So I mean, I mean, my only advice is to gather all your allies, your parents, your family, find a good, I mean, for me, we had to find a nanny that was available at Weird, because they would end up having the kids for 2 weeks at a time, and they had to get them to school and their soccer and softball and make sure their homework was done.
I had a 24-hour babysitter.
On
saying.
call.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of do the same where it's like we just pick babysitters based on their availability, and there's always people who are willing to work. And one thing I will add is, like, you know, you hear terms like nanny and au pair, like that's the popular thing in LA. That's just a fancy term for a babysitter who's on call when you need them. And they're actually cheaper than a babysitter because you're hiring them for like 40 hours a week or more if you need it.
So true. So true.
I'll say in New York, I found this mom group in Queens, and in the mom group, I was able to find somebody that would do nanny shares. So we would share a nanny, and they would watch both the kids, which is cheaper because obviously nannies are really expensive. At least in New York they are. And I will say that was really hard to navigate because I didn't know anything. Like we got slapped with a giant, like $6,000 fine for Workers' Compensation Bureau of New York because I didn't have a workers' compensation policy for the nanny that was working in my home 40 hours a week. Even though we were sharing her, she was in my home, and I like had a nervous breakdown. Like I was like, where are we going to get $6,000 to pay this fine? And it was, you know, we had gone out of the country for Christmas, and then I got back and I saw this because we didn't respond. It was a mess, and I ended up appealing, and I got it down to about $1,000, but that still was what hurt. But there was just a lot of learning curves that I didn't understand. And the nanny being out sick, she was older, so then she had some health problems, and like the beginning was really hard because at that point, you know, I was the senior engineer of a weekly radio show that had to get out on the air, and I've got a nanny who's like calling out sick on me on a regular, and I can't come in to mix the show. It was very stressful in the beginning, but you know, we figured things out. We learned about backups, and my husband and I had to tag team a lot, but here we are. We've survived.
Oh, and I'll add, having a kid is the perfect reason to raise your rates. Like for me, I think my rates have never been higher because, you know, you have to say, hey, I got to pay my babysitter. So if you want to hire me, then, you know, my rates are this high. So, I mean, I think that even though it's difficult, like, you know, you're basically just hiring someone to replace you. So it's really no different than hiring someone on the job where it's like, hey, I'm looking for an assistant who I would trust with, you know, my gear and my clients. Well, instead it's just I'm hiring someone who I trust with my kid. And I've actually found like it's a lot easier to entertain a 3-year-old than it is to find someone who can mix a spot and do it on time and keep the clients happy and all that kind of stuff.
Anybody else want to jump in on daycare?
Yeah, well, we could have an entire workshop just on that subject. I mean, for me, obviously everyone on this panel can attest to the myriad of challenges that you face as a parent, but I think childcare has been the single greatest challenge that and ongoing that has sort of been at the forefront of parenting. You know, I've never even working on television here, the fact that I still tour and I'll do one-offs, and my ex-husband also works in the business. He does not have a 9-to-5 or job now or then. In the early years, he was also touring. So the criteria for finding someone is really challenging. No one wants different hours every week, you know, let alone you say, well, some weeks I'm going to need you 20 hours. Other weeks I'm going to need you 80 hours. Some weeks I need you to live in and stay overnight because I'm on the road and my ex-husband's working until 2 in the morning on a show. And I can't afford $25 an hour, you know? So finding someone to line up with your financial means. And also, you know, I found over the years, especially with less experienced babysitters or nannies, we always had to have one person, a nanny, because it was just too complicated. We couldn't patchwork babysitters. I mean, maybe for weekend stuff or, you know, odds and ends, but you know, 2 of my kids have special needs. They go to school an hour away. We need someone that can drive, that can do all the activities. They've played, you know, sports over the years, and it's so challenging. And the less experienced babysitters, because my kids spent so much time under, you know, the care of others over the years, their sense of security gets really destabilized when that is not consistent. And when the person is inexperienced and they're not, you know, strong disciplinaries, they don't fill them with a sense of like nurturing, and you want someone to love your kids the way you love your kids, right? And so I have a terrific situation now, but it has not always been like that. And yeah, and it's tough now as a single mom. When I want to go on tour, I have to pay a live-in nanny when I get on a plane.
Yeah, yeah. I think for the people that touring, it's something that's, you know, that I found out. I think it's super critical to find someone that your kids are bonded with, that they trust, so that your kids are not they're like, oh, mom's leaving, what's going to happen? That they trust and love and feel safe with the person that you're going to be leaving them with. And as soon as I was able to find those people in the girls' lives, it was just so much easier. And, you know, it was just kind of like, if you're gonna commit and do this, it's all of you're their third parent. You know, it's not a, okay, see you tomorrow. You got to be in.
Yeah, it's like the bonus uncle or the bonus aunt. It's like not necessarily related, and you might even be paying them, but like they are family.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the girls are still, I mean, super bonded with you know, one of them, she was a teacher at their school. She ended up being, you know, she was their middle school teacher for 3 years. They're super bonded to her still to this day. So yeah, I think anybody that's touring or traveling a lot, that is something crucial to find, that third person.
I took a different route with my childcare because my partner has a very predictable schedule. So I know his shift is 7 to 3 every day, you know. So for me, it was, okay, in order for me to tour, let's just look at what childcare options we have and take me out of the picture. I'm unreliable if I'm on tour. So what works within your 7 to 3 schedule? And so for us, it was, you know, I started looking at nannies, but then, you know, the realization became really clear in the state of Washington. You have to provide health insurance. You have to provide all these things. Plus, if the nanny gets sick, then you're SOL. So I quickly shifted over to daycare. And then it was, what daycares work within this, you know, this hour. Again, it's logistics. And so we happened to find a daycare that was nearby in the right price range and was open 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., which left a lot of room in there for the drop off pickup with me not being in town. And so, and, you know, someone's sick, they have rotating teachers. So we never had to worry about losing childcare due to illness. So that provided an incredible sense of, you know, security, knowing my kids are taken care of. And it was just one less thing to worry about while I was gone. And in addition to that, they would do, it was a family-run daycare, although it was a big school of over 100 students. It was family-owned. So the owner I'd be like, hey, I'm feeling like I miss my baby. And she'd text me photos and do whatever she could to help me feel connected during the time that I was away. So that was incredibly helpful.
Yeah. someone in the chat, Whitney, is asking, how did we find our nannies? For me, it was family, friends. It was always family or friends that, or, you know, like their long-term nanny ended up being a teacher at the school they went to, which was super convenient when the teacher lived on campus for a while. So when I was gone and the girl's dad was gone, they just lived at school. It was a little mini boarding school. But you guys have any tips on where you found your daycare, your nannies?
It's changed over the years. You know, 16, 15 years ago, I used Craigslist. And to be honest, in those days, some of the best people I found that way. I've used, like you, Karrie, you know, the situation I'm in now is another mom friend that I met through school, and her daughter used to watch my kids. And anyway, there's also, there's a bunch of nanny babysitting sites now that I've used more for temporary care or you know, like babysitting, not the full-time care. What are they called? Oh, there's so many.
We used care.com. That's what we used.
Yeah.
Urban Sitter is a good one as well. Yeah.
We
They
used
do
a place
background check.
called Mother's Helpers is what we used.
And you just interview them the same way you'd interview them for a job. You know, you just come in, you meet them, you get a feel for what they're like, and then, you know, at least if you're hiring someone hourly, you just try them out and see if they work, and if they don't, you hire someone else. It's our situation hasn't been.
Not so much for babysitters, you know, or I might get a friend's recommendation, but for full-time care, I would always, once I would hire someone, I would do a full background check.
Yeah, and always, you know, make sure to do the interview with the child there to see how they react and respond to the caregiver.
And I've been relying a lot on the Facebook groups as well, because there's a lot of mom groups in our area, and one specifically for like looking for nannies or help or babysitters and stuff. So, and sometimes they have lists themselves of people that are already recommended in the neighborhood and stuff. So it's nice.
Yeah, that's a good point. Mom groups in general, it's like this world that I had no idea existed until I was a mom. But it's like, you know, because you get the full-time moms there, right? It's like how we go to SoundGirls or wherever to get our engineering, you know, help, right? You go to a mom group to get your mom help. It's just
your mom help.
Yeah.
It's so true. I never thought I was going to be one of those, you know, I never thought I would be in a mom group, and then lo and behold, love it. Love them. Love them all.
Okay, before we move on, because we are running a little behind, but it's fine. I'm eliminating some questions that I think we've covered. Two, and then I'm going to run to the bathroom. Question about breastfeeding. And then how do each of us deal with the long hours, days, weeks, or months, in some cases, of being away from our kids? And, you know, like in retrospect for me, it was more guilt that I felt than actual long-term damage I thought I was doing to my children, because they both turned out fine. But, you know, I had to decide what I was comfortable with being away. And some of that was based on what their father's schedule was, if he was on tour at the same time. So it always fluctuated. If I had a tour and he was home and they were with him the whole time, I was fine. I didn't have that guilt. It was when we were both on tour, and then I'd be out worrying that whoever was taking care of them was getting them to the things that were important to them, whether that was softball or soccer or art class. And that was going to be there if they needed that person for anything. So I will leave you guys with those two questions. I didn't breastfeed for very long, so I cannot offer any advice on that.
I was gonna jump in because I was mad at my school for not providing private places to breastfeed or pump, and I'm still mad about it. You know, 10 years later. Like I had simple questions like I said, okay, I'm gonna need, because I for some reason I didn't have use of my office. I think they were remodeling the building, and so I said, yeah, I need a private place to pump breast milk, and I got this offhanded answer like, oh, you can use the lecturer suite. And I'm like, are there any lecturers that are going to be coming in? Does the door lock? Is it private? Can I send an email to let them know that I'm going to be doing this? And I got this, oh, you're being such a pain in the ass kind of response. And so I was mad about that. Oh, but of the beauty of breastfeeding, there's that. So I had two different kids with two different personalities. The first one would wouldn't latch and just, I had, as a first time new mom, I got the person to come over and weigh the baby before feeding and weigh the baby after feeding to make sure he was getting enough milk, but he was colicky. But if you're doing the mom groups and you're doing research, like, you're not allowed to use the word colicky. And I wish, looking back again, somebody would have just told me I have a colicky baby so I could have treated him, because it was like it was killing me. And then my sister said, oh, just hire a night nurse, because I wasn't sleeping at night because the kid wanted to feed every night, 90 minutes. And I'm like, I'm dying. I'm actually dying. I didn't know motherhood was going to kill me. And, my sister's like, get a night nurse. And I'm like, okay, where are we getting all this money from? So that was a thing. And then I had, when Kira, my sister, I wasn't going to use her name, but when the second one came along, she just would latch right there and suckle and just be the happy little baby. She's even, to this day, just so joyful. And I'm like, well, that's a connection I could make right away. Just, but yeah. Oh, and then I had to, when I stopped breastfeeding the first time, was because I got food poisoning, and I wasn't allowed to breastfeed until the bacteria got out of my body. So I was really mad at that too. So I don't know. My first kid breastfeeding was drama, and then the second kid was like, it was great, and it was like free liposuction. And I got down to 130 pounds. It was great. Anyway.
Nobody ever talks about how difficult it is to breastfeed,
Preach.
especially the first month. The first month, it's painful, it's bloody, it hurts, you get it wrong, it does. Sometimes they latch, sometimes they don't. It was like the hardest thing I've ever done, and probably also like the thing I'm really proud of myself for getting through with both of them. And then both of my kids wanted to nurse till they were 5, which was miserable for me because I have always worked full time. So yes, I hear you on the pump. There's never a place to pump. Never. There's like no good place to sit there and hook up and milk yourself anywhere. Like, please don't tell me to do it in the bathroom. I don't want to pump milk from my baby and near a toilet. Like, nobody talks about how hard this actually is. And for some people it may come really naturally, but I had to like work real hard both times. And with my son, he had this little it's considered a birth defect actually, where his top lip was kind of fused to his gum. So there was no way he was getting around that nipple. We had to take him to get laser surgery just so that he could latch. It was awful. It was awful. That's all I have to say about it. But we did it. It happened somehow, some way, and it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever experienced.
I want to give a little context for anyone who isn't a parent yet. One is that breastfeeding it becomes this physical thing. Like, if you're used to peeing 4 times a day, or you're in a session and you feel like you need to pee, that's basically what breastfeeding is. Like, every 2-3 hours, every hour, whatever it is, you feel like you have to pee, and you cannot, you have to go deal with it, right? It's something you have to tend to. And pumping, if you don't have a child there and you are pumping, it's literally the process of being hooked up to a machine that pumps milk out of your body, and it could take 8 minutes or it could take 45. And so it's basically like being stuck in the bathroom for 20 to 40 minutes, every couple hours while you're at work. It kind of sucks. Actually, it really sucks. But then the other element of it is that it's like, let's say everyone on this panel was told, you're going to start playing guitar right now. And in 2 hours, you're going to be on tour with the band performing on stage. And you fucking suck because you've never done it before. You've never taken a lesson. And everyone seems to tell you that it's just so easy, right? You know, it is not natural. It's not easy. You know, even learning an instrument, it takes practice. It can be painful. You can hurt yourself. And then, but yet in this situation, it's like 2 hours later, you got to go practice again. And it's 2 a.m. Well, you got to get up and play your fucking guitar. It's 4 a.m. You got to do it again. At 6 a.m. you got to do it again, right? So that's why I think it becomes like this. It's the bane of your existence, but it's also like I have to make this work. Like there's this like internal, like I don't know if anyone else can describe that, like internal. You know, where it's like I want to make this work. No
well, it's yeah, it's the realization that like when I started breastfeeding, like first off, I was an emergency C-section, so the nurses just kept on coming in and going, oh well, you know, your colostrum's magically gonna come. And like, I was trying to breastfeed and I'm like, nothing's coming out. Like, it's the colostrum. And I'm like, is it invisible? Like, is it magic? Like, like, help me out here. And they're like, it just happens. And I'm like, that's not helping me. Finally, the milk came in and I was like, oh my God. And then it was the realization that, oh my God, I'm the food, like I am life support for my child. Like this area here has now become the life force for my child to survive. And then that's kind of like really cool, but also super terrifying because then it's like, oh my God, I have to keep this little being alive. So yeah, there's like a whole bunch of like, there was just like ups and downs. And then like Erika said, like you're bleeding, you're hurt. You're just like, you know, like April said, every 2 hours, it's like, oh my God, I have to do this again. You know, it's
I still
really
wake
cool.
up every 2 hours.
But the flip side is if you can, it releases chemicals into your body. Like that is part of what creates the bonding with your child. And it's also like, I don't know, like for me, it's absolutely was one of the hardest things I ever did. And it was absolutely one of the most rewarding things I ever did.
100%. Yeah.
And I know a lot of people can't, like, and the other thing that sucks about it is I think a lot of people experience guilt because they either can't make it work or they have a work situation where they can't. I mean, there's people who are like, give the baby formula because I have to go through life. And that's cool. Like, that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
I had to kind of, oh, sorry. I
definitely
fight
mixed
till
in
the
formula.
end. Yeah, no, I had to fight towards the end. Like, same as Leslie, I kind of had to advocate for a space. I pumped in the studio, I pumped in the conference room, I pumped wherever, except the bathroom. I was very adamant about not using the bathroom when it was offered to me as an option. But then when I started going back to the studio work, I was like right at the end. I always set a goal for myself of a year. And towards the like 6-8 month mark, I was like, I don't know if I can make it because I wasn't producing like as much, but I had to like, I did like industrial pumping at the beginning. So like my freezer was filled with breast milk. So yay for that. Cause I wouldn't have made it till the end without that. But I did start supplementing with formula. Like I would mix the two of them because I didn't have enough at the end. And I would mix formula with breast milk at the very end. And because I went back to work at 3 months, like by the end, I didn't have much. So I would feed him in the morning and like my little boy is like super active. And so at the end, it was like he was doing acrobatics on me. And I just was like, I don't know if I can do this anymore because he was like turning different ways and like jump. And I was like, I can't. And in the end, I stopped rather abruptly because I was in a session where they were hotboxing. And I didn't, I read a little bit about the secondhand smoke and weed and whatever. And at that point I was like, he hit a year. Do I want to risk it? He's probably going to be fine. But like, it was just kind of like, it was one day to the next. And I remember kind of like how much that impacted me and like how hard it was because it wasn't like, I didn't get to have that moment where I was like, goodbye, breastfeeding and baby on me. It was just kind of like the next morning I wasn't going to feed him because I had been secondhand smoking for an entire day. So it was kind of disappointing that that was the way, but I mean, I also didn't like say I need to leave the room because I'm still breastfeeding. But I think mentally I was ready. But you know, now in retrospect, it's like, would I have finally let go? Like maybe it was the push that I needed to let go. But I think in this industry, you kind of have to be prepared too for like making those decisions if you need to stop because of the environment you're around.
I'd like to speak to having to make actual job decisions with breastfeeding in mind. I was lucky-ish that I didn't have any PJ work, because at that time that was really all the touring I was going out on in the very early years. But a tour came up with my first son. It was a South American tour, and he was about 8 months old. And I was pretty passionate about breastfeeding all 3 of my kids. And by the way, breastfeeding is a personal choice. You know, there's a lot of stigma around it and judgment. And, you know, for me, it was important. And so when I got the call about the South American tour, I was like, I can't do it. You know, I'm not going to give up breastfeeding. I love this band, but I'm not going to give up breastfeeding my son for them. And I got a call back the next day saying, well, what would it take? And I said, the only way I'm going is if he goes. And that's really not a request you can make nor was it a request. I was just stating a fact. And, you know, I think with any other band, it wouldn't have even been a consideration, let alone something I would have requested. But in this case, the band said, okay. And so I brought a nanny, and he came with me to South America, and I was able to, you know, continue breastfeeding him. The subsequent tour, I just couldn't do it because by that time I had 2 kids. There was a Canadian tour that came up, and it was the only leg I ever had to miss. And I had to bring someone out to run it for me. But I did go out, you know, and start the tour. And we were talking a little bit earlier about, you know, that was super, I think my son was only 3 months at that point. So, you know, having to pump from afar and then carry days worth of breast milk back to LA was a challenge in and of itself. So that's tough to be put in that position if it's something that's important to you, and having to make those choices. The other thing that I wish someone would have told me is how much your supply goes down when you go back to work. And so especially if you're working crazy hours where you're having to pump more than you can nurse, your supply for some people will really be affected. And so what I did with my second and third child was get the freezer, and I just pumped like a maniac in the early months. I overstimulated my milk supply so that I could basically feed the equivalent of like triplets. And so I would feed, and then I would pump and feed and pump. I would just constantly pump so that by the time I went back to work, I was able to supplement just a little bit longer with breast milk and try to nurse, you know, for as long as I could last. And I also think, you know, the pumping situation is a nightmare, especially if you're doing gigs. And I was always sort of nervous or tentative to make a thing of it. So I just dealt with it. I pumped in bathrooms. I pumped in disgusting locker rooms in South America. And but I think the awareness surrounding breastfeeding and pumping is really gotten better over the years. So I think that's an expectation you can have in the workplace to have that request. But sometimes at gigs, it's hard. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of supplement that. Like for me, I was very lucky to have an office, but I only really got to breastfeed for like 6 months because my son actually had a severe protein allergy. So I had to completely take out I was basically a vegan that could eat meat. Like I couldn't do dairy, I couldn't do eggs and fish and all this stuff. So that was really hard because like my nutrition kind of went down a little bit. And then I went back to work, and same thing that was brought up, like my supply just kind of started dwindling because number one, I had to supplement with an amino-based formula to just keep him healthy. And then I was also trying to pump at work, and it was kind of nerve-wracking because of course when you're in an office, you know, I was expected to like take phone calls and, you know, deal with people, and then also, you know, act like a cow with, a double breast pumping at the same time. And I kind of wish I had kind of been more open about it. So people would have, given me a little bit more space. Like I wanted to be private and I just closed my door, and then people would get mad because my door was closed, but they knew I was in there and they didn't put 2 and 2 together. I wish I just would have been like, hey, gonna pump now. I'm a mom. These things are working. Like, gotta do this. I wish I was like more open about it. So people were like, okay, like every 2 hours, if her door's closed, I'm not gonna like pull on the door and like bang on the door and be like, Tina, why aren't you answering? So yeah, I would encourage people to just be like, hey, I'm a mom, this is happening, and be more public and open about it. At least that's what I would do now.
I was pretty lucky to have Keely as a resource when I found out that I was pregnant, and I knew right off the bat that I wanted to, I set a goal of 1 year of breastfeeding, and I knew, similar to Keely, that we had a South American tour coming up when my son was to be 8 months old. Different tour, but same kind of time frame. And, she gave me her tips about the pumping and freezing and all that before I gave birth. So I remember meeting with the lactation consultant in the postpartum room saying, like, pumping is going to be a part of my life. Let's chat about that. And so I started pumping day 1. And I established quite a familial relationship with my multiple pumps. I had one at home next to my bedside, one in the office. I would breastfeed my son, but I had the alarm on my phone that went off. I can't remember if it was every 2 or 4 hours, 24 hours a day, just so that I would constantly pump and stock up on supply so that my son could still receive breast milk while I was on tour. So I really put the anxiety, like I had so much anxiety from the very beginning based on supply in the freezer. And it was something that I thought about constantly. My son, he learned to sleep throughout the night at 1 month old. So we got really lucky, and then he was sleeping 10, 12 hours a night, but I was still waking up to pump throughout the night. So it's sort of like the job's never really done. And so I stocked up, that became like another full-time job on top of everything else. Even just like the cleaning of the pump parts, I had a whole system. I had a supply at home, at the office. I got really lucky. I came back from my maternity leave, and our guitar and drum technician had frosted the windows in my office to provide a private space. So I felt fully supported in, my breastfeeding career. But when it really came down to it, about a few days before I was set to leave on that South American tour, I'm in the ER with my son, who had been in and out of the ER, including a 1-week stay in the ICU when he was 3 months old. And we had just learned at that point that he had an issue in his throat that was causing all of our trips back and forth, the breathing issues and all that. And part of that was due to breast milk, and the breast milk making its way into his lungs. So after all this, 3 days before leaving on tour, I'm told he can't take breast milk anymore. You need to transition to formula. And so it was just the craziest thing, because I realized all the pressure I put on myself to meet this goal, it was just all in my head, and it was out of my control. So my journey with breastfeeding really ended during that tour. I pumped while I was on tour, just pump and dump, just to sort of keep things going in the event that we can transition back after a period of time. But it really, the supply was affected. And then in the end, I just sort of let go of the pressure I was putting on myself. And with the second kid, it was actually just so much easier, because I had already let go of the expectations I put on myself. And so yeah, it was it was a really intense thing. And in the end, I just learned that, like, you know, you just can't control everything. So just chill.
Yeah.
Just like a lot of other things in parenting.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's super important because for me, like, you know, I think all of us like, but this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a career and I'm going to be a mom and my kids are going to be perfect and I'm going to breastfeed and I'm going to have a natural birth. That was my whole vision. I had a natural birth for one, and the second one was breech, and the doctors were like, you really do not want to do this naturally, so we're going to prep you for an epidural and then we're going to pull her out. So, and then, you know, the girls were 5.5 weeks early, so they were born without the sucking reflex. So I was never able until they could catch up, I always had to pump milk for them. So my milk never really came in as well as it should have. And then by the time they had the sucking reflex, like she wanted nothing to do with my breast. She was like, go away, I want bottle. So she never went. And then the other one, she wasn't using the breast really as to feed herself. It was more of a pacifier. So she would just be attached to me. And I'd be like, no, this is not happening either. And it took another mom of twins because I was losing my mind. I wasn't able to pump enough milk. One wasn't latching on, the other one wouldn't get off. And she just was like, I'm bringing formula over right now. And she wasn't even a mom of twins, it was a mom of triplets, and her triplets were only 4 months old. So she put her triplets in the car. I was living in Seattle. She was all the way, like in Magnolia, all the way on the other side of Seattle. I was in West Seattle, drove formula over to my house and said, you're going to give them formula and they're going to survive and you're not going to be stressed and everything's going to be fine. Don't feel bad. And she was right. I was like, she took that pressure away. So it's
I
like,
just have to say, ditto. The day that I discovered how easy formula was, I was like, why did I make such a big deal out of it? Like, this is like, I just boop, 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 and you're done, and that's it.
For me, it was finding the right size nipple for the baby. Because I had bought you know how they have size 1, 2, 3, or whatever, depending on how old the baby is in infants. And I was beating myself up and going crazy because the first baby I didn't know if he was getting enough food. I just wanted him to sleep. And I mean, help me God. And so my best friend, who had a baby like 15 years before me, she said, maybe you're using the wrong size nipple, if you're trying to transition to formula and we were having this problem. She said, try using the different size nipple. And I remember discovering the number 4 nipple. And I'm like, we got to use number 4 all the time. And so I remember, at 2 in the morning, I would get so pissed off at my husband, like, the baby's crying. What size nipple are you using? Use the 4. Don't use the 2. And God, that was a repressed memory. Thanks for letting me bring that back out. But yeah, the baby was just hungry to get that food in there.
What's funny about this, though, is to me, like, I could see someone who's not a mom yet being like, why are they talking about breastfeeding and nipples and all this stuff? But the first year, especially, it is all troubleshooting. Like, you take all these skills that you learn troubleshooting on the job, and you are applying it literally 1,000 times a day. My kid won't sleep. Okay, well, let's try troubleshooting. Can we try this? My kid's not.
That's very true, April.
Right, and so it's almost like taking like our brains that are normally. I think every mom does this, but us especially. I'm sure we get really analytical towards, because that's what's in your world, like literally all the time. And then as they get a little bit older, I mean, I know my son's only 3, but it seems like you kind of can allocate some of that brain energy and that troubleshooting back to life, and a little bit less on like the troubleshooting needs of your child, or not like in as short of a period of time.
Yeah,
for sure.
I was just thinking about this because, like, you keep track of like what goes in your baby, what comes out of your baby. And like, I used to have like apps, like how many times poop, how many times did he pee, making sure all that happens. And now I'm like, I don't know if my kid pooped today. And I kind of don't care. I mean, he's fine.
It's just learning the difference between like an 1176 and a pull tag or whatever,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, there's definitely there was definitely this engineering approach for me. I'm like, it's going to be one of three things, right? Hungry, sleepy, poopy, something. Like early on, it started at that, and I was like, okay, so what are all of the different ways that I can attack those things or solve those things? Like, what is the bounce? What is the pat? What is the thing that's gonna work? Like, yeah, and then how it transitioned back into work was, this is nothing. I've got this. Like, this is okay.
All right.
Nobody needs to be freaking out right now. Trust me, I can solve this.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting point though that you bring up, April, is how like I feel like, especially because my son is still small, is like trying to find the brain space to figure everything out. And like the organization that I used to have with work, like I used to be like real, whatever. And then sometimes I just like, and especially now, like right now with all of the quarantining stuff, like the beginning was really hard because it's like I want to work, but I can't because my kid is home. And I love working, and it's been hard to transition that. And I think it's a weird, like mom brain is a real thing. Like I forget stuff. I had to open my own like project management on Trello, which we use. I don't know if anybody uses Trello.com, but I had to open my own thing because I had to have all of my projects and all of my separate clients like in columns so that I could see what my deadlines were this week, what I had to meet, because otherwise it just was like, I'd be like, oh God, this thing is due tomorrow and I have no time to finish it, but, and pull all-nighters, So mom brain is real. And I think it's hard to kind of like figure out. I mean, I hope it gets easier as I get older. But yeah, I think the beginning is tough to kind of like find that sweet spot when one day it kind of switches and then you can try to transition that organization back into work as opposed to like, did my kid eat 3 times a day?
Right. Yeah.
I'm just thankful for iPhones and reminder apps and everything. I don't know how moms did it before, like personal like PDAs and stuff. That's been like a savior for me to balance life and baby and parenting and everything.
It's true. I mean, you have 7 jobs,
Yeah.
You're the chauffeur and the cook and the teacher. I mean, especially, don't get me started on the lockdown. Oh,
Now we're all home teachers.
Right.
You're
Teacher.
I'm so thankful my kids are not here.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. But I also didn't have any apps either. Internet was still on dial-up when I had my kids. So. All right, we are gonna try. There's 2 big things that we didn't get to. One is maternity leave, and I don't think we've even touched on that. So I'm gonna try April, and I put it in the chat, and I'm gonna put it on Facebook again later. April actually had written a blog a while ago with a lot of resources and tips for maternity leave and budgeting financially. I briefly looked at it this morning, April, but it's up, and I think it answers a lot of the questions. I think the big one, some of you have jobs that you had maternity leave available to you. I didn't. And I did turn down a tour because I was going to deliver my kids, and that wasn't going to be out on the road 2 days after. So I took a forced maternity leave for myself that was unpaid. So I don't know if we can briefly talk about the different challenges with maternity leave when people went back to work. if it's even available. And one of the questions is, if you're a freelancer, how do you even take maternity leave? Which, as far as I know, you're going to have to, if you're going to take it, you need to save for the amount of time that, or your partner can support you.
I'm going to say, sorry,
Go ahead.
real quick, just the one thing that I want to make sure that everybody knows, and if you live in New York, and I don't know if the rest of the states have passed this, but they passed the paid family leave law. So in New York, I think now it's up to 12 or 20 weeks. I don't know. Maybe it's, I
12.
forget. Is it 12? Yeah. Okay. So anyways, when it went into law, when I had my first, so I had an extra 8 weeks that I tacked on as like, I took every Friday off for like, I think for the full 8 weeks. But it's really important. And when I went, as the day that I went back to, as an independent contractor, I found out how it worked. You had to get it within 6 months of being an independent contractor. Otherwise, you have to do like a 2-year grace period. But I was within the 6 months. I got my own New York state insurance policy. And now I know that I can take paid family leave through the state, regardless of the fact that I went back to do any part-time work at this point. So I just check out your states and see if they've passed things. But in New York, at least that's.
It was paid family leave?
Yeah, it's like 60% of the like your salary, or the average salary of New York or something like that.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
California,
it's decent.
California has the same thing, and it's through the it's disability insurance, and you just basically have to have coverage 6 months before you're pregnant, and that provides disability. So if you're put on bed rest during pregnancy, 6 weeks postpartum, and 8 weeks paid family leave, which you don't have to. You can take it every day. You could do it over a year. And freelance dads who have that coverage will get 8 weeks paid family leave. So it's. I wish I'd known of that. You know, my husband could have gotten into it, but we didn't know about it.
Right.
So definitely look into that for your state.
I think that they didn't have that 10 years ago, though, because I know for me it was unpaid maternity leave, and then I found out that there was like a little bit of disability, but it was, I think, like 30% of your paycheck, which is not a lot. So yeah, that was an interesting part of my discovery, because at that point my husband was freelance as well, so he didn't get anything, but I was like a third of my pay, which was a little stressful, and it took about 6 months to get, so I actually didn't get it during my maternity leave, which was a little tough.
I want to point out to anybody out there who's thinking about having kids and taking advantage of these benefits. Like, my most recent child was 8 years ago, but there's this sort of myth that if you have a full-time, like I worked at a university and I was a tenured professor and I'd been there for 13 years, and I mean it's not that great. I mean, the cushiest position, this is Leslie Gaston, this is not, I might be wrong, but I thought, having a cush job was going to make, maternity leave just so great, and it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't. It was nice, but I think that the point I'd like to make is that other countries are doing this way better. I mean, I have a friend in Germany who got paid leave for like 3 years for 3 kids. And her place in line was kept at her job, and she worked for a radio broadcaster. That's what I'm talking about. So I think my situation was, I got it's 12 weeks, and then I had to take all my vacation time, which was 55 days, which is less than 2 months, and, all of that to kind of cover a semester. Basically, the biggest thing that I got out of my benefits as a university tenured professor was that I didn't lose my job. I think we can do a lot better, America. That's all I'm going to say about that.
I agree.
I completely agree with that. My partner is French. My kids are both American French citizen, so half of our family is over in Europe. And, you know, I was pregnant with my first at the same time as some other friends and family in France. And just like comparison, it's just so depressing when you realize, oh, you know, maternity leave can start 2 months before your due date. and then all the services. But so yeah, I do really feel like it's a cultural issue in this country.
Yeah, for sure.
3 months off with each kid, and that was largely determined just by the state family leave allotment. I think covered 3 months at the time. I had seen all these other women outside of the industry get pregnant, and so many of them, once they had kids, never seemed to want to go back to work. You know, there was this whole, and I was like, God, am I going to be one of those women that once I have a kid, I never want to go back to work? For me, it was the opposite. By the end of 3 months, I was totally ready to go back to work. And, you know, something falling in the column of, I wish someone would have told me this before I had my first child, was how lonely it was working, and how lonely parenthood was as a first-time mom. It was like having the rug ripped out from under me.
Yeah.
Well, like not only the hormonal tsunami of shit that happens after giving birth, where you feel so out of sorts, but you know, you go from being this like career-driven person who's just work, and you don't realize how much of your ego and your sense of identity is shaped by your job. And then you overnight, you go from that status to something totally different that I was really ill prepared for. And at the time, I didn't have a lot of friends that had kids. So suddenly you're at home all day, every day with an infant that you're figuring out how to take care of for the first time. And you don't have any adults to talk to. You know, I made most of connections later through school and in sports. I never felt like, I tried some of the mom groups, but I always sort of felt like a fish out of water. I couldn't find the rock and roll moms, you know, I couldn't find the moms that swore and talked about like taboo subjects. And so I would sit at these mom groups and just feel even more isolated, you know, which is not to say they're all like that. It just happened to be the experiences I had. And so that first maternity leave was tough, but I mean, beautiful, obviously, but you know, I feel like we always talk about the beauty of parenting, but not the sort of dark side of, you know, figuring the guilt that you feel because you're not doing everything perfectly as a mother, as a new mother. And so by the time the second and third child came, you're so busy with multiple kids, then it takes that isolation out of it, and you know what you're doing. You're a little bit better prepared. But the first one was eye-opening in that respect for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I faced a lot of isolation. I remember the Pearl Jam office sending things and calling, and they're like, "What do you need? Do you need someone to bring you food?" And I was like, "I need someone to just come have lunch with me," because I was all by myself with 2 babies and no one to talk to. And they're like, "Oh," no one had even thought about that. And they're like, "Oh, I'm on my way," you know.
I think,
so, yeah.
you know, as people that are sort of accomplished-based driven people, you go from these professional accomplishments to feeling like you've actually accomplished something if you get one load of laundry done. And it's comical, but it's actually a real thing. You're suddenly like, oh my God, I'm just happy if I get a shower and a load of laundry done. And this is not feeding this part of my needs as an adult and as a woman separate from motherhood.
All right.
Yeah. My first maternity leave was 2 months, and then my second one was 3 months. And I had more time available to me, but I think I 100% agree with you, Keely. That was my experience. Just being at home with a baby all day, there was something that was missing for me, and just that interaction bit. And my biggest accomplishment the entire first 2 months for my first maternity leave was getting in the car and going to a Starbucks drive-through all by myself with an infant in the back seat. Like, that was the biggest thing I did by myself and felt like I did it. And so transitioning back to work, everyone kept saying, you're going to cry, you're going to cry, you're going to cry when you drop that kid off. And I was driving away from the daycare like, am I a horrible mom that I'm not?
Yeah.
I have guilt that I'm not. Like the guilt is, you just can't escape it. You don't know that you're having the guilt that you're not having guilt.
Yeah, exactly.
Same. I used to feel bad when I dropped my son off at his school this past year, because I was like, does nobody else feel relief? I should feel bad. I really should feel bad. But I really loved going to work. I miss work.
Yeah, I was going to say, for me, I was one of the moms that like at 6 weeks, like needed to get out of the house and go back to work. And thankfully, again, great employers, I just strapped them on me and took them with me and had to do it. And I think with the first one, it was really, really hard. Postpartum was just a trip for me. And I really fell into this sort of that depression that people talk about that's really scary. And so I was very careful on the second one to make sure that I had a plan to have outlets just for me as an individual, not as a mom, not as a worker, not as an employee, not as just time for me. And that was so helpful and so hard to do. But I think it really helped me with the mental health component and physical, emotional stuff on the second one. So yeah, and same thing. I had these moments when I dropped, my children off at daycare where I felt that relief and excitement to get to go to work. And then at the same time, I've traveled for work, for weeks at a time, and have just felt so excited and so happy to be home with them, and have felt this immense amount of, guilt from being away. So I think it's just part of it, and having a great therapist and exercise routine and time for yourself is paramount. Like, I have to have my time that isn't for work, that isn't for kids, that isn't for anything but my whatever, getting my nails done, writing music. It doesn't matter. It's my time.
I think it's a great point about doing that being a parent almost forces you to take care of yourself more. And I'm thinking about right now about people who might be on the fence about whether they want to become a mom or not. And I know some of the things we're saying probably sound like, oh man, that sounds awful. Like you can't wait to get rid of your kids, or, this is painful, that's difficult, or whatever. But I think part of it is that you learn to be honest with people, and you learn to say more clearly the things that you need, which I think for a lot of us as women is incredibly difficult, right? Like for me, prior to kids, I maybe wouldn't have said as openly to my clients, like, you know what, I really need to be out at, I need to take this time off or whatever. Like you might have, like, I don't know, tried to finesse the message more, but now it's more just about like, nope, this is what I need. And if you fit into this, great. And if not, then I'll go find another client. And I also feel like, in a weird way, the pandemic might be a good way to relate to this experience, in that, like we all have been made these major shifts in our life that wasn't expected, and it kind of happened overnight, and we're still kind of adapting to it. And that, I feel like parenting is a little bit like that too, where you're trying to navigate having a job in the middle of all this other stuff going on, right? Which is the same as the pandemic, and everyone's going to handle it differently. But at the end of the day, who you are at the end of it is going to be, you're going to be a better person. You're going to have, stronger character. Like you're just going to know who you are more by going through it. And there's the kids. The kids are awesome. Like,
The kids are awesome, but everybody needs a break from everybody, whether they're your kids or not. Sometimes I need a break from my cat. I think for me, because I didn't have any, I knew one other woman that toured that was a mom, and I kind of went through I can never go out on tour again. How could I leave my kids? Who am I going to leave them with? I have to go back to school. I guess I'll become a teacher. I went through all of this in the first 8 months, and finally, then I started doing little we didn't have that much touring. We had like a 5-week tour or something. And I kind of felt, I went and did it, and I kind of felt guilty, and I still wasn't sure what I was going to do. But then I really missed doing shows. And so, you know, I was really torn. And this woman, Gloria, she was just like, you got to do what you love. Do you love your job? And I was like, yes, I love working in music. I love being on tour. And then she's like, so do it, because that's going to make you happy. And if you're happy, you're going to be a better parent. Don't worry about being away from them, because if you're home and you're miserable, that's not benefiting anybody. And so I just, over the years, I became comfortable with, when I am home, I'm home 24/7. You know, and as the girls got older, they'd be like, you know, became teenagers, and like, when are you going back out on tour? When is your next tour, Mom? It's time for you to go. So I think that's really important, is for everybody to be able to find what they're comfortable, and the balance in the whole adventure, whether you're working in the industry or not. Just finding that balance between, you know, your kids and other parts of your life. You guys have any thoughts on that?
I'd like to kind of chime in. I think, you know, I took 2 months off maternity leave. Looking back on it, wish I had done the 3 months. I wish I had like spoken up. I had a lot of pressure from the owner of the studio to come back as soon as possible. And I thought I was going to be like a good worker and, you know, good employee. Like, I'm going to sacrifice my last month. But that being said, I also, when it came to going back to work, that morning, I guess I was so elated to like get out of the house that my husband was like, oh my God, this is the first time I've, you know, because I did have a lot of like postpartum depression and everything. And he just looked at me and went, this is the happiest I've seen you since having this baby. And I was like, yeah, I get to see people. I literally like kind of left the house skipping off to work. But then, you know, I also had, in negotiating, taking only 2 months off, like Erika had mentioned, I was able to bring the baby with me 3 days a week, which was pretty amazing. I had a little bassinet in the office and everything. I was able to like be a mom at the same time of running a studio. But I wish I had a bit more voice about what I needed. I think, you know, to kind of piggyback on what April was saying, with this pandemic, I'm actually finding that voice where when we opened the studio back up, my boss was like, I need you back full time working in the studio. And I literally was like, I'll give you 2 to 3 days, but I want to be home with my kid because he's stuck at home. And there's 2 people that he sees, and that's it, ever since March 13th. And I was like, I can't take away, 40 hours or more because of commutes and stuff. I can't take away 50% of the people that he sees in person all the time. Like I'm standing up and I basically was like, it's kind of a take it or leave it type of thing. You can have somebody, because I'm working at home anyway, but at least it's like I'm in our home office space. But then he's able to, like, after playing video games, he comes in and just like gives me kisses and we like snuggle a little bit, but I'm still working and I'm still productive. And I'm kind of proud of myself for putting my foot down on that during this. So figuring it out still.
Figuring it out. Anyone else? Closing thoughts?
I loved what you said, Karrie, about really finding something that you love to do for work. I hope it doesn't come off as some sort of cliche, because I think that for me has been, you know, not only a point of esteem as and an empowering things to be able to work in music. It's creative, it's lovely, it's hard, and be a mom. I don't know. I think you said it so well, and I can't repeat it, but it was also in the subtext of this panel. So maybe I should just pull it up if anybody else saw it. But yeah, don't give up on what you love just because you also want to have a family, I think is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
And be a parent.
And like April said, advocate for what you need, your needs. It's important too.
Yeah, don't be afraid to have that voice, which does take with, I was just reflecting back on everything that Tina was saying and what some other people were saying. Early on, I definitely made sacrifices that I regret because I was too afraid to speak up. And I probably wouldn't have lost the job. I probably would have gotten what I needed had I just communicated it without fear.
Right. Yeah, well, I think things have changed a lot more than maybe we even know from 24 years ago when I had kids, because it was just, I would have never advocated for anything I needed. I knew what I wanted and what I didn't want, but like I wouldn't have gone to any of my employers, any of the bands I worked for, and said, well, I want to tour, but I want this, or I'm going to do this. You know, I just wouldn't have advocated for anything. I would have just, this is what I'm doing, and they were like separate. So I think that's, I think now the work environment is different, and that you can advocate. I mean, touring, obviously, there's still going to be things that you're not going to be considered for or able to do, or even want to do them. But yeah.
And the flip side is there's women with Emmys, Grammys, Oscars, you know, like across the board, people top of the field who figured out ways to make it work. So yeah. Not that everyone has to sacrifice somewhere, but like you can still have a career that you are proud of and have a child that you're proud of.
Yeah. Well, you know, this is interesting. One of our fellow touring mates, last time we were out, you know, we were involved in a conversation with someone that had come to visit me at a show, and we were talking about parenting, and she wanted to know how to navigate it and stuff, and I was like, hey, how do you navigate this, tour dad? And he was like, and I don't think anybody thinks about this, but he was like, I hate having to be on tour. It breaks my heart. I want more than anything to be home with my kids. And like, you know, I never really thought about the guys on tour being dads and being like, you know, because that's just, sure, they're guys, they're on tour, they're supporting their family. But, you know, he goes, if I could do anything, or if my wife could support me, I wouldn't be here. You know, so I just thought it was super interesting because I had never thought about it that way. I always kind of thought about it. The dudes get to do whatever they want to do, you know, but that's not necessarily true.
I think, like for me, I was actually the first female employee to ever have a kid at the Village Recorder. So when I announced that I was pregnant, everybody went, wait, what do we do? Like, are you just going to leave us? And I was like, no, but I'd like to continue managing. So let's figure this out. Like, I'll need maternity leave and stuff. And everybody was freaked out because nobody has ever had to deal with this ever. Like, the HR person has been there for like 25 years. She was like, I don't know. I'll have to do research and figure out what we do for you and whatever. So I think, you know, that was always kind of very foreign to them. And then, you know, Erika came along, and she was already a mom when she came to work for us. And it was very inspiring. She inspired me a lot because she did stand up for, hey, I'm a mom, need to get my kids, here's my schedule, like, here are my boundaries. And it was amazing because she did put up those boundaries. And it was like, you know, and like our you know, other people that work there were like, wait a minute, but aren't you going to just make her work whenever you need her to work, because that's what we do? And I think that kind of changed, you know, just me and her being there kind of changed the paradigm of, even now we've got a couple of guys that have kids, and they're very involved. They're not just, hey, I'm just going to leave my wife and kids at home and I'm going to work whenever you need me to. And I'm trying to make it like a friendlier thing where he's like, hey, my wife's working, I need to be home with the kid. Is that cool if I take today off? And I'm like, yes, I will work with you. So it's, at least for my studio, I'm trying to make it like a more family friendly, understanding work environment, because then everybody's happier. You know what I mean? Like, we're all a better team because of it. So yeah, so I have Erika to thank for that as well.
Yay, Erika.
Oh, no, I mean, Tina's the one who got me that job. And I think, yeah, I don't know. I think maybe might have been, it doesn't matter. Anyways, but yes, thank you. I'm grateful.
But I do also have to say, I find it hilarious. Like, I had baby bump when I was engineering, but then Erika and I both had this problem where in Studio B, and I just have to tell this story really super quick. You know, it's almost time to stop working when you can't fit behind the console in Studio B. And I think both Erika and I both had that, where we were like, oh, can't get back here anymore. All right.
Yeah,
well,
can't fit.
So I just wanted to mention that. It was awesome.
One of my favorite things that happened in the studio when I was pregnant, like, and I created castles in my belly for both my kids. Like, I was ginormous with both of them, but it was like a live like KCRW broadcast or something, and one of the people in the band were like, what's that pregnant lady doing in the studio? And then just like casually another engineer was like, she's fixing the console.
I love it. All right, does anybody, we're definitely over and we missed some questions, but maybe I'll hit you guys up in the next couple weeks and we can fill in some of the blanks and put them up as an article to go along with this. But does anybody have any closing advice for anybody?
You can do it because you're a goddess, and you can do it because you're awesome. You can do it even though it'll kill you. You can do it.
Thanks, Leslie. Anyone else?
We have a SoundGirls. We do have a Facebook group for moms in audio. So please join us if you are pregnant, expecting, or have a child.
Yep, we need help. And reach out if you, I'm sure everybody on this panel would, if you needed to get in touch, they would be happy to talk to you. I'm speaking for everybody, I'm sorry. But I think they would. All right, well, thank you, everybody. Have a lovely weekend. We'll see you soon.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
Carrie. Thank everybody.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thank you. Thanks, Carrie.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.